This is just a quick video I wanted to post before I get back onto the HP 9845. This is not my typical content, but I wanted to post this video to try and help anyone that has one of these. In fact, it's not so much the scope itself, it's one of these devices down here. And I've become aware that a lot of people have had a lot of issues with these. And in fact, I had exactly the same sorts of issues myself. And I just wanted to point out how I got around the problems. So, if you're not familiar with one of these, it's obviously a telescope. Light comes in through the top. This is an SC type telescope, so light comes in down to a big mirror at the bottom here. It's reflected back and focused onto a smaller mirror at the front end, and then it's reflected again, back down, and the light exits through a hole in the center of the main mirror. When you buy these, there's a 90-degree optic on the end here and an eyepiece, so you can see what you're supposed to be looking at. As you can see, I've replaced that with a camera, and that's partly because I want to capture images, but also because I tend to use this scope remotely. I have it connected through a 30-foot umbilical that I've made up. It's got various connections through this. One's for power, one's for the USB 3 connection for the camera, and there are two repeaters on the lead. USB needs repeaters at regular intervals. And then we have another connection here. So the remote control for the scope is an RS-232 connection to the handset. And in my case, that goes through down the umbilical to an RS-232 to USB converter. So I have two USB connections controlling the scope. So I've currently got it connected to the remote control software. So I'll just drive it around a bit so you can see that it is indeed under remote control. So as you can see, I can control this remotely, but I also of course needed the ability to focus this. And that's where this comes in. When you buy the scope, there's a kind of a thumb wheel down here. Now it's not ideal because this is quite a high magnification scope, so it's fairly short. It is an 8-inch scope, so if you come anywhere near it, even if you just walk around it when you're trying to use it, the image will tend to shake. And certainly if you touch it, trying to focus it, it becomes quite difficult to focus because the action of trying to focus it makes it shake about. So this device is a motor-driven focus unit. But this is where a lot of people started having problems. So the unit itself is actually quite nicely made. It's quite a nice looking unit. But the way this scope is set up and configured, you can run it from 8 internal AA batteries. I'm just going to lower the camera a bit. So in the mount you can put 8 AA batteries. That will power the scope. I don't really use that. They don't last very long, and it's a bit of a pain if you're halfway through a night's observing and they run out, because you then have to realign the scope. It is a tracking scope, so you do have to align it to make use of it. So you can connect an external power source, which is how I tend to use it and how most people probably use it. But there's an auxiliary output that can be used to control things such as the focus unit. So the signals come in through the RS-232 link. There's another lead coming out of the handset that sends data signals into the scope mount, and that includes the two auxiliary connections. In my case, I have one lead coming out and going to a GPS unit, so the GPS unit down on the tripod. That's so the scope can figure out where it is, so I don't have to keep entering that. And that's daisy chained, and the output from that comes up and goes into the focus unit. You can see the lights on the focus unit, but this is where things start to go wrong. This is how most people would tend to have it configured. And it doesn't matter, it doesn't make any difference to the fault whether you power it from the internal batteries or this external connection. So I'll try driving the focus unit in and out. Hopefully you better hear it. So I'll connect, and now we'll try and drive it around, and you can hear it moving. So I'll keep driving this around. Okay, it's about a minute and a half later, and hopefully you can hear the focus unit is still driving. I'm just going to quickly disconnect it. Okay, so the focus unit was still driving. It had kind of run away, and it wasn't down to any commands I was sending to it. And that's what it tends to do. It will work for a while, and then randomly it will either disconnect or it will run away. The motor will just carry on driving in whatever direction it was last turning. And the only way to stop it is to either unplug it, as I did here, or you can restart the software utility and try to drive it in one direction or the other. Doesn't make any difference whether you connect it direct without the GPS unit. It does the same thing, and it also doesn't matter whether you power it from the external power or the internal batteries. It does the same thing, and it's a real pain if you've aligned the scope and you've got something coming into view and it runs away. It's very annoying. So when I first encountered this, I assumed it was a faulty unit, but looking online I noticed that many other people were having the very same problem, all the same symptoms, doing exactly the same thing. So I decided to have a look at this and went through the normal system checks. And it is a system design issue, and it comes down to the way power is distributed on this particular arrangement. So you get power coming in through the external power connector or from the internal power, and it makes no difference. The unit just really selects power whichever is available. That is then sent out through to the various parts, including the handset, out through the auxiliary port. So this connection, this control connection, also feeds power to the GPS unit and to the focus unit. And that's where things start to go wrong. It causes interference on the data lines, and that's what's causing the unit to disconnect. And I found a simple solution was just to power it independently. There is an external 12-volt connection for the focus unit, so I'll just really reconfigure this the way I normally use it. So this is how I normally have this configured. I have power coming in from the umbilical, splits into two. I do have another one of these where it splits into three when I'm using a band heater, and it's all powered from the same source, and I use a 12-volt battery. It can either be plugged directly into this, or normally I would have it on the end of the umbilical, and I can of course use a mains power supply if I want to. But it splits, 12 volt goes into the mount, and then 12 volts goes directly up into the focus unit, and that completely cured the problem. I haven't had a single issue since I've done that. I tried to return it back to the standard form, not powering it from this 12 volts, and the problem's returned. So I'm fairly confident that was causing the problem. As I say, I haven't had a single issue since I've done this. Very simple fix. I made this, but you can buy these splitters. They're only a couple of pounds, and it's well worth doing that. And it made the focus unit usable. It wasn't usable before. It was so unreliable. Once every minute or 2 minutes it would run away, and apart from anything else, you can damage the scope doing that if you drive the main mirror too far, although it's got stops on it. This has got quite a lot of torque, and you can damage the scope. So I didn't really want to use it that way, so it's well worth looking into this as a solution. So hopefully that's of use to anyone that's had this issue, and in the next video I will get back onto the HP 9845.